Hey, everybody. I am here with Dr. Stephen Duncan. Has a Ph.D. and he's a certified family life educator. He's a professor at the School of Family Life at Brigham Young University. He specializes in strengthening marriages and families through outreach, family life education. And at BYU, he teaches undergraduate and graduate courses in family life education, family adaptability and resiliency, and marriage enhancement. He's a fellow member of the Utah Marriage Commission, and that's where I met him and came across his work. And I would argue truly that he's one of the top marriage experts in the world. Like, he's been teaching in his position for over 30 years. It's one of the most prominent schools in the nation. And I'm honored to have you here on the show and share a couple of minutes of your time and learn about your expertise. So thanks for being here, Dr. Duncan.
It's so fun to be invited. Happy to be here.
So you proposed the topic of talking about keeping marriage strong as the years pass. And I think this is the puzzle. This is the thing that everybody wants on their wedding day. They get married and they're like, I want this to last. And so many marriages don't. So I'm very curious to kind of get your take on what it is that makes marriage last over the years, throughout a lifetime.
Yeah, let me give you some background. First of all,
Please.
A lot of us enter into marriage with fairly high expectations, and some of those expectations don't get met. And we see a pattern of decline, erosion during the early years of marriage, often because the idea of marriage, companionate marriage, is just fraught with so many expectations that aren't necessarily tied to reality. And so there's some evolving disappointment over time. Different scholars call this either erosion, disengagement, disenchantment. I like the term entropy, this idea that really comes to us from physical sciences, that there's a tendency of a physical system to become less energetic, to lose coherence over time, until there's a little trace of cohesion left. And some of that, if it's fed when we are early married and have all these expectations, that's actually accelerated depending on the kind of unrealistic expectations we have to begin with. As you mentioned, we become married with very, very high hopes, and nobody gets married to get divorced. Or, hey, I'm planning for this precipitous decline as soon as I enter into this marriage union. We don't plan for that, but the fact of the matter is that married couples do permit their marriages to grow old, grow stale, like worn out jokes, old bread, dried out bread, cold gravy. Different religious leaders have used terms like that. My good friend William Doherty, who's at the University of Minnesota, has coined this idea of marital entropy, using that physical sciences concept where couples gradually lose coherence over time.
Yeah.
And I would add to that, unless they do something intentional to shift the drift, because the drift going downstream is going downstream or toward this decline. And so it's just like a boat launching out into the Mississippi River in the direction of the tide. You're going to float downward unless you do something to paddle the other direction. And so often I like to talk to couples about this really cool substance that we call cornstarch. And if you've ever used cornstarch, you know that it has some pretty interesting properties.
Yeah, super interesting.
Unless you manipulate that cornstarch, it will eventually trickle through your fingers.
Right.
If you continue to manipulate it, it will continue to be hard.
Yeah, it stays solid.
And stay solid. So whatever you need that for. And so I think couples in our audience will probably say, so how do I keep my marriage solid, cohesive, notwithstanding, here's the drift, and what are the lists of different kinds of intentional activities I can get involved in to somehow avoid that, or at least help to slow that?
So before we dive into the solutions, I'd like to elaborate a little bit on the problem. When entropy takes its toll on a marriage, how does that, like, what are the signs? What is that, the evidence that your relationship is degrading, that it's deteriorating, that you're drifting apart? As those are some of the words that you used.
Yeah, often we, for example, just in social science research, can see graphically depicted this decline. And they usually use multiple items to measure what that decline is about. Some of it is about the frequency and quality of communication. So if frequency and quality of communication about important matters tends to decline, that can be a sign that we are moving more toward entropy. How about time spent together and the kinds of things that we actually do to spend time together? The frequency of time, some national data has shown that our frequency of dates together decreases. Now, in some cultures, it's strongly recommended that we have weekly dates. My good friend John Gottman recommends at least an every other weekday. That's part of his 5 or 6 magic hours. Most of those hours taken up by that weekly or every other week date. The couples who become more entropic over time are not finding those opportunities to be together and spend time together and actually make their weekly or every other week time together ritualistic, meaning that it doesn't pass without us having this together time. It's not negotiable.
Right.
Those are two major features that I see. Some worry about the decline of sexual interaction, but some of the long-term research about sex is that the more accurate definition is that it's modified over time. Some worry about the loss or the decline of passion that we would self-define as passion. And if you're a newlywed, maybe that passion is expressed in every evening or maybe every day, 2 or 3 times having sexual intercourse, and that's the ideal. But as we get older and as that takes on different meaning, and intimacy means not just about being physical together, but even just touching together, even sitting and watching a favorite program and holding hands while we're doing that, and crying during the touching scenes. All of that is a certain kind of an emotional intimacy that over time ultimately can replace or at least be carefully partnered with what began as more intense physical intimacy when our sexual life together was new and novel, but other things give it additional meaning. Even our experiences of life, being there when we've suffered together, gone through tragedies like the loss of a child. There's been lots of opportunity to lose family members tragically during this COVID-19 time, or if not loss, but serious illness where maybe a partner loses some of their capacity even to take in air or to have the same level of energy as they used to before we started to know them initially.
That's one thing I'd love to talk to you more about. When a couple does go through a really trying time, like the loss of a child or an illness or a loss of a job or a parent, there's these things that blindside us in life. What are the things that we can do for each other as couples that will help our marriage endure? And so, because I feel like these kind of they're these big landmark moments in our life that oftentimes tilt us one way or the other. They bring us closer together, or they drive a wedge between us and end up, ending the relationship. And so what's the difference between the couples who, when they lose a child or lose a parent or go through a big life transition, who come together from the people who go through a similar trial and it drives them apart?
One of the things that we've learned from research is that even though there is, as Doherty proclaims, that there is this precipitous decline unless we do something resisting that drift, that slow drift, still the marital life is more about stability. And there may be declines, but numerically and in terms of the multiple measures that fit this measure of marital happiness, and some of the very best long-term studies that follow the same couples over multiple years has shown it's more about stability, and the decline is a few points. But among those who resist that and who still maintain that level of happiness, it's really about consistency before those tragic events, consistency before those major transitions of life. It's what they are doing prior to, and to continue to do those things in a ritualized way that really helps them to be resilient in these times, these couple resilience opportunities. For example, I love to study and examine transition to parenthood, which for some people can be a real tragedy, or they think that's going to be, because if you read some of the research, it's like, my marriage is over. I'll never have the same level of intimacy. It's going to change my life forever. See you, sweetheart. You know, maybe we'll see each other as ships that cross in the night somewhere, between baby feedings and stuff like that. But the important thing to realize is that the couples who make those transitions successfully, as often stressful as they are identifying and building their friendship. It's that part of that, keeping that, as I mentioned before, that, anyway, I'm drifting. The cornstarch, there we go.
Cornstarch, yeah.
It's keeping that cornstarch solid, and we'll just leave that analogy, but I just wanted to...
I love the way that we circled back to it. That's perfect.
We circle back to it because it's about solidarity, it's about cohesion, and not letting go of that. And so one of those important rituals is, well, do we still plan time to talk as friends, even if that conversation happens during a night feeding, that we're up and we're having that conversation. My wife and I love to talk about politics, and we actually can do that without fighting. And
I applaud you. That says a lot about you.
Well, we're both engaged in those issues, and it doesn't matter so much if you have differences of opinion, which we often will have differences of opinion. It's that you're willing to talk about hard things and walk through it and listen, try to really make sense of another person's point of view. And that's nowhere more important than listening to your intimate partner and understanding what she or he really feels about and understands to be the case. And by the way, you're probably are going to learn something, both from, you're going to learn that she or he has a particular point of view that's insightful, and it becomes really educationally valuable for you. Yeah. But also, you're going to learn something about the inner world of that person, about how they come at things, how they approach things. And so the idea of taking that time and making it a ritual, taking time to connect, to, as my friend John Gottman says, to turn toward rather than away from one another, especially during the hard times.
Yeah.
Now, years ago, I had a heart attack at age 39, which almost took my life. And it happened during a very difficult snowstorm in Montana. And it took the ambulance 20 minutes to get there. Wow. And then 20 minutes to get me to the hospital from there. And so my life was a little bit uncertain during that evening, and through a lot of prayer. But then the recovery, and after the heart surgery and after returning home, then you are faced with the hard task of recovery And my wife became my major caretaker. She was the one who pulled on my support hose.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't do that. And she had to do that until I had the strength, or until my fairly extensive wound on my chest healed that would allow me that natural strength to do that. But during that time of great hardship, and we actually became very much more cohesive as a couple, and also as a family, because my children were all young, but some of the older of the young ones stepped up and did what Dad did, like chop firewood for our wood stove downstairs that heated a good part of the house. So keeping those things that you did beforehand ritualistic, then they become aspects of solidarity. I think if we didn't have premarital education, if we didn't have a kind of a basic understanding of what makes a good marriage work, and then we're practicing those things, those communication, those time together on dates, shutting off the TV and just chatting with each other about difficult things, co-parenting together, sharing that parenting together. If we weren't doing that ahead of time, then some of those hardships may have thrown us into a pretty serious lurch.
That's such a great answer that I didn't expect that answer, actually. The couples who deal well with life's tragedies, unexpected tragedies, are actually the couples who have a prior history of consistently being there for each other. That's really interesting.
And not only has Barbara been with me, supporting me, I'm the weak guy. I'm the one with the 2 heart attacks and more health problems that I care to talk about on the air, but significant ones. But Barbara has had her challenges too, and she's turned to me and said, "Stephen, I really need this or need that," and I'm happy to do that. I would give my life for that woman, and she essentially. And we've been into that gig for now 38 years, and we've cared enough about maintaining the strength of our marriage so that our investments are worth it, and it's all about who we are.
Can you give me a little bit more of a peek inside your relationship? I'd love to hear more about what are some of those small, consistent things that you've done to ensure that, like on a more practical level, that your relationship stays strong. You said you've done those date nights. You turn off the TV and have conversations with each other. What are some other of those little things that you do that maybe some of us could do as well to have that type of consistent investment in our relationships?
Excellent question. Yeah, I think in marriage, the big things are really the little things. And so that would be my overall category, attend to the little things. And I think couples have to detail what those little things are and to do it with one another. I love it when you scratch my back. I know when my wife leans forward, I know where she's going with that. And it's a very private matter, but I know that that's what she would love. And she says, I have magic fingers. And who does not want to be known as someone with magic fingers?
Right.
So I love that idea. And it really is built around love. And when we are doing things that we are forever seeking the interests of the partner and making that part of our little daily walk of life. Some couples will sit down and actually discuss and enumerate the specific things that make them feel loved, and then agree to do that often, because love expectations not shared forces the other partner to engage in mind reading. And I don't know very many people who are really good at mind reading, and I know I've experienced a few failures in my day. It's much better, even though for many it seems unromantic, to actually make a list and even check it twice. Some practitioner folks even say, yeah, when you receive that from your partner, check it off. because it reinforces their giving you of that particular action that says, I love you, I care for you. And so anyway, I know for my wife, she loves to hear I love you. I grew up in a family where we didn't share I love you. I grew up in a family of 5 boys and no girls, just my mom as a single parent. And she wasn't terribly cuddly either. And my brothers and I, we fought. I was the youngest, so I probably got most of the privileges. But in any event, but when I entered Barbara's sphere and her family sphere, then they say, I love you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times on a phone call. I mean, this is just something that they do. It flows from them.
Was that difficult for you at first to adjust to that?
No, actually, I actually relished it.
You're like, yes.
It was actually freeing for me. But this manifestation, this saying you love somebody, always showing it, finding ways to specifically show that. And Barbara likes back rubs. She loves me doing things for her without announcement, just going in and doing things. So she likes to receive those. So tuning into how a partner loves to receive love. And part of the way you learn that is finding how they give love, because the way they give love is very frequently the way that they prefer to receive it. And it's also true among kids too. And so little things such as finding ways to be loving. I mentioned earlier also about ritual. Now, a lot of talk about ritual. In our faith traditions, we have rituals. In the Latter-day Saint tradition or a Catholic tradition, there are sacraments. There is communion. There is sacrament meeting where we are partaking of the emblems in remembrance of Jesus' sacrifice. Ritual in marriage can be just as sacrosanct, just as important and meaningful in terms of keeping the bonds strong. And so I love the model that comes from my friend Bill Doherty. And your readers, your listeners can go to the book, The Intentional Family, if they don't know about that book, by William H. Doherty, good friend of ours, and has come to Utah actually to speak. He's been around longer than dirt, but he's still there and he's still contributing. But he talks about 3 different categories of marriage rituals. One is the connection ritual, where things like the comings and goings on an everyday basis. How do you say goodbye to your partner when you leave to go to work? Of course, we haven't been leaving anywhere, right? During the COVID-19. But
to your office.
Exactly. I am currently in my office in my house right now. But twice a week, I actually go to my campus office because I teach on campus at BYU. But I don't like to leave without kissing her goodbye, nor does she like to leave without kissing me goodbye. That's a goings. A comings is just a welcoming where you're perhaps engaging in the same thing. Risings and retirings are another aspect or a category of connection ritual. When you get up in the morning, do you jump out of bed and hop in the shower? Or do you savor the moment a little bit? Maybe lean over and have some cuddle time. I have a friend who doesn't get out of bed until there's been 20 minutes of cuddle time without fail. And without fail is what convinces you that this is a ritual or a tradition. Tradition is also a term that's often used, but it's ritual in the sense that it's celebrated. It doesn't pass without happening, without some reason. And retiring. A lot of people pray. A lot of couples pray before they retire and kiss goodnight before they kiss. And some say you got to kiss for at least 6 seconds. Or, whether that's an empirical reality or just a really cool idea to get a little bit more lip time in before you go to bed. I mean, all of it is good.
You're hitting all my buttons here. So I want to show you something. I just did a presentation with somebody right before we jumped on our call, and I showed them this. So this is my marriage scorecard. And I have,
How
I,
cool.
I track these rituals. I track these little daily habits of things um, that help make our marriage strong and mean something to my wife. And my 6-second kiss is on there. I've got some comings and goings on there. We've got some
Excellent.
traditions around like helping around the house, some daily tasks. And I know when I go through that checklist on a daily basis, if I've checked all the boxes, I know I'm showing up as the best husband that I can be. And
Such an excellent idea.
well, I mean, you just talked about it, checking off the box when you receive the love too is a really interesting idea. uh,
Mhm.
Noticing, like getting in the habit of noticing when your partner is intentionally investing in the relationship and acknowledging it
Yes.
and appreciating it, like both sides of that coin. Tracking your own investment and noticing when your partner makes an investment is such a powerful way to like always be conscious of where your relationship's at and where it's going. I know Carl Jung, one of my favorite quotes of Carl Jung's is, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And I think there's a lot of people who live unconsciously in their marriage. And then when they end up getting a divorce, they're like, it just wasn't meant to be. It's just fate. But when they make these little things that you're talking about conscious, like these comings and goings and the kisses and like connecting meaningfully and turning off the TV and having conversations and going on regular date nights, and you start making these conscious investments, your relationships outcome isn't left to fate anymore. You have control over it. You've become conscious of it. And so I love that you're talking about this, because this is like exactly the type of thing that I eat up. This is like you're singing my song right now.
Excellent.
Um,
Yeah.
Go ahead. You were going to say something.
Yeah. I just wanted to mention one aspect in the connection area. This is just the one category. The other two categories are love and celebration, which I'll also briefly mention.
Yes.
In the connection area, I always love getaways too. My wife and I love history things, particularly early American history. And we had a getaway. One summer, actually, it was the summer before COVID hit, when it was still permissible to travel fairly openly and without risk. And so we went to see the redwoods, which we had never been to the redwood forest before, and so stunning to be there. But later on in the summer, we went to the other end of the country and went to Philadelphia and took in sites there. But also the Hershey Museum in Hershey, Pennsylvania, and Gettysburg. So, like the song says, this land is your land, from the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream waters. We actually have been everywhere now on these getaways in some way, either with our family or with one another alone. And those have been powerful bonding times.
I love it. And what about, you said you're going to mention celebrations briefly.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I was going to mention love and then celebrations. And you've been talking about using that wonderful chart to sort of monitor how you're doing individually and as a partner. And then the partner can also monitor that and say thank you for what she or he receives from you, which reinforces the systemic change in the partnership, and which it makes it more normative for the partnership to engage in that. When you feel like something's missing, then you can almost always turn to, oh, this is something we haven't been engaging at. That was so fundamental to our early growth and development. And, we ought to return to that, or maybe we tweak it a little bit and still bring it up so it's got a lively sense and renewed sense in our relationship. But yeah, in the love area, weekly dates, as you've mentioned already, and I've tied in a little bit, and I mentioned earlier that dates tend to decline over time. And what is a date is, the research shows that people have different definitions of what it is. And women think, and particularly gendered definitions. So women think it's this, men think it's this, and unless they get together, then they can go out on a date and nobody believes that they've really been on one. And so you have to decide on what those dates are and then to do them regularly. But having time for intimacy anniversaries, making those important rituals. Barbara and I just recently celebrated our 38th anniversary, and we ate a bunch of fish that was Cajunized.
Ooh, Cajun fish.
Which was really good the first night, but we should have eaten it all. But I wasn't going to eat $65 worth of fish and Cajun food that one night. But we decked it out with nice candlelight, just Barbara and I, and because we're empty nesters now, and we were just there. And I told Siri to play good music, and Siri brought up the list. And she delivered. Well, I guess it could be he delivered, depending on which Siri you get. You know?
Right.
The last category is the celebrations one. Here's where I think of birthdays and special events in the partner's life. My wife's birthday is coming up in a few days, where she'll turn 65. So turning 65 is a big deal, and it's transition matter. And it was a big deal last year when I turned 65. And my children, my wife did something for me that was just stunning. And so I'm going to try to do that same kind of thing. Unbeknownst to her, I'm not going to let her know some of that. But it took me years to figure out her birthday, how the important things about her birthday. And it's really important. Here's where it's really important to talk to your partner about what's your birthday dream? What would you really like? Not what you would like to receive, but often it has to do more with, breakfast in bed would really be cool, or something like that.
I love that. So many amazing conversations to have. So I want to dig deeper on an idea that popped into my head a few minutes ago when you talked about, like really understanding how your partner, basically becoming a student of your partner and understanding how they want to be loved so you can deliver that on a regular, consistent basis. I've heard the phrase often used that the key to a successful marriage is you just need to put your partner's needs before your own, and they need to put their needs before yours, and then you'll be happy. And I think personally, I think there's a little bit of danger in that. And I'm wondering if you can talk to the balance between relying on your partner to meet all of your needs and being attentive to your partner, and still like serving them without making them dependent on you. Does that make sense? I feel like there's a gray line there, and I'd love if you could explore that a little.
Well, the research shows that sacrifice in relationship is important, and I love the phrase from actually it's in a Rolling Stones song that I use with couples when we're having workshops together. You can't always get what you want. Maybe you know that song, but it has the lyric, you can't always get what you want. Mick sings that 3 times, Mick Jagger does. And then he concludes that verse, but if you try sometimes, you just might find you get what you need. Now, I never would necessarily say Mick Jagger is the source of truth, or he's delivering truth criterion for a healthy relationship. But as I've explored that, and particularly with my colleagues at University of Denver, Scott Stanley and Howard Markman, who are the developer of the PrEP program and have written a book called Fighting for Your Marriage, where they talk about some of this expectation stuff. Expectations are real, and they are based on what our genuine needs are. And when we experience disappointment in a relationship, at some level, the math would suggest that we are diminished in having a fulfilled expectation in some way. Now, there's things about expectations that can be troubling. They have to be realistic, or not troubling, but need to be looked into. How realistic are the expectations? Because you, as a couple, as individuals, you should really only be committed to meeting reasonable expectations that our partners have for us, but realizing nobody gets everything they want to perfection. And if they don't believe that, if they don't realize that, in their marriage relationship, they will be very frequently frustrated. But it's tied to the over expectation that's assigned to marriage too often and early on in relationships. And part of that, that expectation syndrome is part of what fuels this decline in satisfaction during early marriage. That we see that happens pretty universally around couples. It's not really strong, but meaning it's not really strong in the sense it's significant statistically, and you can say these are group differences, but you have to unpack those groups too, because some of those groups are growing over the years. Some of those are in a precipitous decline. Some of them are pretty steady, and it's more about stability of marital satisfaction and well-being over the years, through the years. But some of them, I always like the ones who are increasing and learning more about that percentage, which in the Gottman research, there's 18% to 28% of couples who are during transitions to marriage and transitions to parenting, they are still increasing in their relationship strength. And mostly because of some of the things that we've been talking about already, that they are continuing to do, that they did before the transition took place, and that they are continuing to do.
I love it.
I'm not sure I'm answering your question.
No, you definitely are. The one thing I'm curious about now that hearing that is like, after understanding that sacrifice is important and you're not always going to get what you want, is it dangerous sometimes to assume that your partner is the person who's responsible for like meeting your needs, essentially? Like, what's the balance between me being responsible for meeting my needs and making sure my desires get met, and then me, because I'm married to this person who I'm in a relationship with, and I kind of have this expectation that they're going to take care of me? Like, where is there I feel like there's just like a delicate balance there. And if you take it too far to an extreme, you can end up maybe harming your relationship.
Yeah, I think that's tied to what couples do to figure out with one another what those expectations are.
Got it.
And assign them particular reasonableness. For example, if you were to list expectations out, like I expect my wife to stay the same weight that she was when we first got married.
Unrealistic expectation.
Yeah, my wife, weighed maybe 105 pounds when we married, and that's just not realistic, is it? At least most women would understand. Of course not. Slap that guy around. That is so unrealistic to expect that. And I would totally agree with that. But it's a matter of having the conversation about what those needs are, what those expectations are, or some of them are more implicit and they sort of reveal themselves over time. And you, because you love this person, because you love this partner, you are willing to jump in and make sure that happens. But just to be sure you don't err, it's really good to have the conversation about it. And so a number of people are friends over at the University of Denver, and I see that John Gottman, in his latest book, who, by the way, was the major professor for Howard Markman, who is the prep program developer. Anyway, they have conversations and talk about many of the same things because they resonate in their clinical practice, and it comes from their observational research that they've done with couples. If they have a chance to have a weekly meeting, Gottman calls it a State of the Union. You're checking in. And our nation, we have a State of the Union address given by our president. The prep people.
This is the book, right?
It's in 8 dates. And also the Fighting for Your Marriage book by the Howard Markman, Scott Stanley, Susan Bloomberg group. They actually came up with it first to have what they call couple meetings. And regardless of what they're saying, have a private conversation about how your marriage is going and to do it regularly so that you're not losing touch. You're doing it to update a love map as John Gottman would say, that knowledge about your wife's, your husband's inner world, so that you can respond to it in an empathic, caring, supportive way. And part of that might be tied to an expectation. You know, I really want you not to jump in and give me all the answers that you think I need or to solve the problem for me. What I really need you to do is just sit and listen and acknowledge the pain that I'm experiencing, period. That's all I need. And often during those conversations, which are quite quiet and just validating from the listener's point of view, become ways of them triggering insight with them to help them solve their own issue, because they've had a chance to throw it out to somebody and to listen to it bounce off that person. And each actually reduce the amount of power that the negativity associated with that might actually be having in their life. When they hear themselves articulate it, then they see that they have greater control, as you mentioned earlier, Nate, over the situation, and they can move forward. But I think couples are really smart to have these kinds of conversations, and I call them hard conversations, some of the hard ones. But I like the Gottman model, where he talks about learning one thing that's happening in your spouse's life that particular day. My wife will often ask me, so what are you excited about today? Sometimes I'm not excited about anything, but these are great questions, right? And I'm getting dressed, and she says, so Steve, what are you excited about? And then conversely at the end of the day, so this is really a difficult day for me today. I've been trying to get these properties sold for my father, who's passed away a number of years ago. And this has really taken an emotional toll from me. And again, that's a cue for me to say, not jump in and try to fix everything, but listen to her.
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
I'm so sorry. That's so hard. And then after that, show genuine affection, appreciation. She'll show it to me because I've taken the time to listen.
And
other specific things.
You've given us a master class in how to defeat that marriage entropy that we talked about at the very beginning. You know, that's the ultimate enemy is the slow drift apart that is just natural in every relationship. And I think you've given us a ton of tools and examples of ways that we can fight against that and maintain that closeness and that intimacy and that connection, and foster a strong marriage that really does endure through the years. I don't even know if that's the right word. Endure seems like a little too heavy. It's enjoy through the years, you know,
or thrive.
Thrive.
Not just surviving, but you're thriving. You're flourishing. I like the flourishing, the thriving idea. That you stay together, you can share the same home, but if you wanted to thrive, and then there's some things that keep the fire alive.
Absolutely. So before I let you go, is there anything else that you want to share while I've got you here? Is there any other little last tidbits of advice or counsel from a man with so much experience in this space?
Make sure you try to have fun, but I think part of the intentionality is to be planful about these things. And so as you have done, and you showed, Nate, I don't know if your viewers or your listeners can see what you showed me, a great thing to post for them later on, to actually see where you take these ideas and maybe you talk about them in your couple meeting or your State of the Union visit. And then you actually craft a continuing courtship plan that says, oh, here's the connection, here's the love, here's the celebration, here's the little things, here's the magic 6 hours, if you borrow that concept from our friend Gottman, or from the 8 dates, I believe is his book. I think he mentions it in there. Those are grand resources to get some real practical, useful ideas. But the important thing is that, well, let's make these come alive, and this is how we do it in our relationship. And if you're a planner, like my wife is, she likes to have these plans in advance. When we went on a long-term vacation, she starts about 6 months in advance, looking into all the various kinds of resources. And you end up having this amazing experience together. And it's because of planfulness, intentionality to push against the drift before it even happens. And so
I love that. Well, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge with us. If people want to learn more about your work or what you're up to in the world, is there a place that you would invite them to go?
Well, I teach at Brigham Young University, and so most of what I do is with the students and hanging out with them. But occasionally, I would be looking for any prevention and relationship enhancement workshops that are taught around the state. Very often, they happen to have been trained at one of our universities around the state. And we support those in the Utah Marriage Commission. I've got some stuff on our blog post, Utah Marriage Commission blog. I have an article there about keeping marriage growing as the years go by.
Cool.
And that might be a fun summary for you to read, as well as to listen to some Kenny Rogers while you're there.
Ask Siri to play some Kenny Rogers. Got it. Thank you very much, Dr. Duncan, for your time. I really appreciate it.